Hello Nigerians, we have breaking news and this is very serious. If you follow politics in this country even a little, you need to stay with me on this one because what is unfolding right now between Atiku Abubakar, Peter Obi, the Nigeria Democratic Congress and the Tinubu presidency could shape the entire direction of the 2027 general election. Stay with me until the end because I want us to unpack this together, piece by piece, without confusing you with rumor. This story touches the opposition's biggest names at a moment when the calculations for 2027 are already heating up, and every single move being made right now is being watched, analyzed, and in some cases, deliberately twisted. Before I go further, if you are new to this channel, do well to like this video and subscribe so you do not miss anything when we release the next update. It helps us reach more Nigerians with verified information, not noise. Now, back to the news. Let us start with what is actually documented, what is on record. The Nigeria Democratic Congress, that is the NDC, the party where Peter Obi malflies the presidential flag, alongside former Kano State Governor Rabiu Kwankwaso, has publicly called on Atiku Abubakar to step down from the 2027 race. This wasn't whispered in some closed room. It was Theo Abu-Agada, the NDC's Director of New Media and Strategic Communications, who made the appeal openly on the platform X. And I want you to hear exactly how he put it, because the wording matters. Agada wrote, and I'm quoting him directly, "AA is a good and solid man, but he needs to give it up at this point. His idea for a working Nigeria is brilliant, but at this point, he needs to give up his ambition. If he steps aside, nothing is going to affect his sterling legacy. AA should support Obi to kick the APC out." Notice what he did there. He didn't insult Atiku. He praised him, a good and solid man, before telling him to step aside. That's a deliberate tone, the kind of tone you use when you want to persuade, not provoke. Agada's argument in plain terms is that a united opposition behind one candidate, Peter Obi, gives the best chance of unseating President Bola Tinubu in 2027. Two strong opposition candidates splitting the vote, in his view, only helps the ruling APC. That is the fact. Now here is where it gets interesting. This NDC appeal did not come from nowhere. It came shortly after Atiku Abubakar himself, speaking during a Facebook live session, said something that a lot of political watchers picked up on immediately. He said the 2027 election would be his last presidential contest. Win or lose, this one is his final attempt. Now, think about that for a moment. Atiku has run for president multiple times, going back decades. For him to say publicly that 2027 is the last one, that is significant. It tells you he is not planning for 2031. It tells you maybe that this is his final throw of the dice and he intends to make it count on his own terms, as the candidate, not as a man who steps aside for somebody else. So here is the tension, plain and simple. On one side, the NDC is telling Atiku, step down, back Obi, and let's remove the APC together. On the other side, Atiku himself is signaling, this is my last race, I am not backing down. Those two positions do not sit comfortably together, and that is exactly why this story is generating so much conversation right now. I have to be straight with you. I have not seen any official statement, any press release, any documented announcement from Atiku or the ADC directly responding to the NDC's specific appeal to step aside. What we have on record is the NDC's public call and separately Atiku's last race comment. Connecting the two is reasonable interpretation, not a confirmed back and forth. I want you to hold that distinction in your mind as we continue. Now, Nigerians, this is the part where I have to slow down and warn you, because this is exactly where misinformation crept into this story. A claim went viral on Threads alleging that Atiku Abubakar had already withdrawn from the 2027 race to back Peter Obi. It picked up over 1,000 engagements online, spreading fast, right in the middle of active opposition coalition talks, which is exactly the kind of environment where a claim like this can spread like wildfire, because people want to believe the coalition is coming together.
But when fact-checkers went to trace where this claim actually came from, they found something interesting. It appears to have grown out of a song by an artist named Haruna Goro, which called on Atiku to withdraw so Obi could take on Tinubu. A creative appeal, a song, an artistic opinion. Somewhere along the line, it got lifted out of context and started circulating as if it were an actual announcement from Atiku's camp. TVC News Nigeria addressed the claim directly and reported that no such withdrawal had taken place, and there was an earlier interview. Atiku spoke to Arise News in a segment titled Arise Exclusive with Atiku Abubakar, where he expressed a general willingness to support whoever emerges from the opposition coalition's candidacy process. But Nigerians, general willingness to support whoever emerges from a process is not the same thing as his specific declaration that he is stepping aside for Peter Obi. Those are two very different statements, and conflating them is how misinformation spreads. I am telling you this because as a news channel,
our job is not simply to bring you the exciting version of a story. Our job is to tell you what is confirmed and to be honest with you when something is not. Now, Nigerians, here is where the NDC's appeal to Atiku actually fits into something much bigger. And this is documented, dated, and on record. On August 2, 2026, a coalition of political figures known as the G100 issued what they called an open letter to the leaders of the opposition, leaders of thought, civil society, and Nigerians of good conscience. In that letter, they laid out something they named the Doctrine of Necessary Democratic Opposition. The G100 is led by Salihu Mo Lukman, a former national vice chairman of the ruling APC in the Northeast, who has now positioned himself as a broker for opposition unity. Following that letter, the G100 said it held a first round of consultations with the leadership of 6 opposition parties. Listen carefully to the names, because this is the full scope of what is happening. They engaged the African Democratic Congress, led by Atiku Abubakar. They engaged the Nigeria Democratic Congress, where both Peter Obi and Rabiu Kwankwaso hold principal positions. They engaged the Allied People's Movement, linked to sitting Oyo State Governor Seyi Makinde. And they also engaged the People's Democratic Party, the People's Redemption Party, and the Social Democratic Party. In their own words, the G100 described these engagements with national chairmen, presidential candidates, and their running mates as, quote, frank, constructive, and encouraging. They also said something worth noting directly, that they had deliberately kept these consultations away from media glare because, in their words, protecting the integrity of the process is more important than publicizing every meeting. So when you place the NDC's appeal to Atiku next to this G100 effort, a clearer picture forms. This is not just one party sniping at another. This is part of a coordinated attempt running since early August to consolidate Nigeria's fractured opposition to a single front ahead of January 2027. Here is something happening in real time, Nigerians, and I want you to pay close attention because this is current. The G100 had originally scheduled a summit of opposition parties for Tuesday, August 18, 2026, in Abuja. The plan was to bring Atiku, Obi, Kwankwaso, Makinde, and other opposition leaders together in one room to begin structured discussions on what they called the modalities for achieving greater opposition unity. But that summit did not hold as originally planned. The G100 announced that it was rescheduling the summit from August 18th to Monday, August 31st, 2026. The reason given was a scheduling conflict. A separate National Peace Summit was also taking place on August 18th, and it was expected to draw many of the same political leaders and stakeholders the G100 needed in the room.
Now, why does a simple date change matter to this story? Because it tells you the coalition building process is still fluid, still being negotiated in real time, and has not yet produced a single binding outcome. The G100 itself has said its role is not to dictate an outcome. In their words, our role is to facilitate dialogue, build confidence, and help create the conditions in which the participating political parties can openly consider the difficult questions of cooperation, sacrifice, accommodation, and collective action. That word sacrifice is doing a lot of work in that sentence, because ultimately, for any single opposition candidate to emerge, somebody has to step back. And as we have already discussed, Atiku himself has signaled that 2027 is his final race. So the question hanging over this rescheduled August 31st summit is simple. Can these leaders actually agree on sacrifice, or will the summit simply produce more statements and no consensus candidate? Now, fairness demands that we bring you the other side of this conversation, because the ruling All Progressives Congress and its supporters have not stayed silent. A voice associated with the APC, identified as Ibrahim, publicly declared that the proposed opposition alliance against President Tinubu would fail. Separately, another APC-aligned figure, Abdulmalik Jibril, a retired official, went further, describing the entire coalition project as, in his words, an exercise in futility. His argument was direct. He insisted that the performance of the Tinubu administration itself, not political calculations or backroom coalition building, would ultimately determine the outcome of the 2027 presidential election. That is a real argument, and I want to present it to you fairly because that is what balanced journalism requires. The position from the ruling party's supporters is essentially this: Nigerians will vote based on what they have experienced under this administration, the economy, security, subsidy removal, and its aftermath, not based on which opposition figures managed to shake hands in Abuja. The opposition's camp would counter that argument by saying that a fragmented opposition has historically been the ruling party's greatest advantage, and that no matter how strong public dissatisfaction may be, votes split across multiple candidates simply hand the election back to the incumbent. Both positions deserve to be heard, and I will let you, the Nigerian public, weigh which argument carries more truth. Let us zoom out further, because this NDC-Atiku exchange is really just one piece of a much bigger strategy that both Atiku and Obi have been running for months. Both men have at different points called on President Tinubu to either resign or refrain from seeking re-election in 2027. Obi's camp has tied part of this to the president's handling of the abduction of school children and teachers in Oyo State in May 2026, alleging insensitivity, a slow rescue response, and that the president did not reach out to Governor Seyi Makinde to sympathize with the state. I want to be clear, that is the allegation, the political framing from Obi's side. It is not something Tinubu's camp has agreed with or confirmed in those terms. Political commentators have pushed back hard on the broader strategy of asking Tinubu to step aside. Some have argued, and I will give you their side fairly, that under Nigeria's amended 1999 constitution, there is no legal provision that allows opposition figures to simply demand a sitting president resign or disqualify himself from an election without due process. Their argument is that Tinubu has not been shown to have broken any specific constitutional provision, and that calling for him to quit is, in their words, a shortcut to the presidency by subterfuge. On the other side, Atiku and Obi's supporters would argue this isn't really a legal demand, it's a political one. Every election cycle, opposition figures pressure the incumbent, question his record, and try to build public pressure. They'd say calling it illegal overstates what is ultimately just political rhetoric aimed at energizing their base ahead of January 2027. Both of those are real positions being argued in the public square right now, and I am not going to tell you who is right. That is for you to weigh. Here is something else feeding directly into this coalition push, and it happened just last week, so let us bring it into the conversation. On August 15, 2026,
Osun State held its governorship election and Governor Ademola Adeleke secured victory, later receiving his certificate of return from the Independent National Electoral Commission. Opposition figures have already begun using that result as a rallying cry for the wider 2027 coalition effort. A member of the House of Representatives Minority Caucus, identified as Agbedi, directly linked the Osun outcome to the opposition unity push, describing it as, in his words, a victory for opposition politics. He went further, telling Nigerians, and I want to give you his message closely, that regardless of what any party offers or how much anyone tries to compromise, in a democracy, my vote is sacred. And he urged citizens to protect that principle heading into future elections. Now, why is this significant for our story? Because opposition strategists are explicitly pointing to Osun as evidence that a united, mobilized electorate can defeat the ruling party's structural advantages. Whether that translates into a national coalition being able to replicate the same result against President Tinubu in 2027 is an entirely different question. Osun is one state. The presidency is 50+ times the scale, both in logistics and political complexity. Now, Nigerians, I would be doing you a disservice if I made it sound like the opposition itself is fully united on the idea of uniting. There is internal disagreement and it deserves to be reported. Senator Datti Baba-Ahmed, who ran as the Labour Party's vice presidential candidate in the 2023 general election alongside Peter Obi, publicly criticized the opposition coalition effort. During a television interview, he accused the coalition of, in his words, deceiving Nigerians, and argued that it was incapable of rescuing the country from what he described as underdevelopment. He also disclosed his own intention to run alongside Obi in 2027, signaling that even within circles close to Obi's political history, there are competing visions for how 2027 should be approached. The ADC responded swiftly. In a statement signed by the party's Deputy National Publicity Secretary, Jackie Wires, the ADC described Baba-Ahmed's criticism as merely personal opinions that did not reflect the party's position. The ADC reaffirmed its commitment to uniting opposition forces against the APC and stated that its coalition brought together a broad range of figures, including Atiku Abubakar, former Kaduna State Governor Nasir El-Rufai, former Senate President David Mark, former Osun Governor Rauf Aregbesola, former Rivers Governor Rotimi Amechi, and Peter Obi himself. So even inside the camp pushing hardest for unity, you have public disagreement about strategy, about leadership, and about who should ultimately carry the opposition banner. That is worth remembering every time you hear the word coalition used as though it is a settled, finished project. It is not. It is a work in progress with real friction inside it.
Before we move to what this means for you, the ordinary Nigerian, I need to give you some historical context, because this is not the opposition's first attempt at this exact project. Back in 2025, Atiku and Obi were both part of an earlier coalition effort explicitly built to unseat President Tinubu. That coalition collapsed before it ever took off. It did not survive long enough to produce a single consensus candidate, let alone contest an election. So, when we talk about the G100's current effort, the doctrine of necessary democratic opposition, and the rescheduled August 31st summit, we are watching, essentially, a second attempt at a project that has already failed once. That history does not mean this attempt is doomed to repeat itself. Political circumstances have shifted since 2025, and the Osun result has given opposition figures fresh momentum to point to. But it does mean that skepticism about whether these leaders can actually subordinate personal ambition to a shared national project is not unreasonable. It is grounded in recent precedent.
Now, why should the ordinary Nigerian, the trader in Alaba, the civil servant in Kaduna, the motorcycle rider in Port Harcourt, care about this back and forth between prominent figures in Abuja? Because a divided opposition changes what 2027 actually looks like at the ballot box. If Atiku and Obi both run as separate candidates, the opposition vote splits between them, the way many analysts believe it split between them in the 2023 election. If one steps aside for the other through the G100 process or through direct party negotiation, it consolidates that vote into a single stronger challenge. Whichever way this goes, it shapes whether next year's election becomes a straight contest between the ruling party and one unified challenger, or a fragmented multi-way race, and that outcome affects turnout, campaign spending, media coverage, and ultimately whose promises on the economy, on security, and on the cost of living actually get tested at the polls in January. There is also a governance dimension here that goes beyond the horse race itself. Every week these coalition talks stretch on without resolution, postponed summits, internal disagreements, competing public statements, is a week where the political class in Abuja is focused inward on itself rather than outward on the pressing economic and security concerns facing ordinary citizens. Nigerians watching this unfold are entitled to ask whether all this maneuvering is actually about serving the country or simply about who occupies which chair after the next election.
Let me lay out plainly the realistic paths this story can take from here based strictly on what we know today. The first path is genuine consolidation. The August 31st summit in Abuja produces an actual framework, perhaps not a finished single candidate, but a documented process and timeline for choosing one. Under this path, Atiku, Obi, Kwankwaso, and Makinde would need to agree on a mechanism, whether that is a primary, a consensus arrangement, or some form of power-sharing pact for the ticket. This is the scenario the G100, the NDC, and Agbedi's camp are all publicly pushing toward. The second path is continued fragmentation. The summit happens, produces warm statements about unity, frank and encouraging discussions, but no binding agreement on a single candidate. Atiku continues as ADC's candidate, Obi continues as NDC's candidate, and both camps proceed into 2027 running separately, each betting that they individually can defeat the APC. Given that this is essentially what happened with the 2025 coalition attempt, this path cannot be dismissed as unlikely. The third path is the one APC-aligned voices like Ibrahim and Jibril are predicting, that regardless of what the opposition does organizationally, the outcome of 2027 will be decided by voters' direct assessment of the Tinubu administration's record, and that coalition arithmetic in Abuja matters less than actual governance outcomes across the country. I want to be honest with you. As of today, we cannot tell you with certainty which of these three paths Nigeria is on. What we can tell you is that the August 31st summit is the next concrete date to watch, and whatever comes out of that room in Abuja will tell us a great deal about which of these three futures we are actually heading toward. So where do I stand on all of this? Honestly, I believe the country deserves clarity, not conjecture. If Atiku intends to run, he should say so plainly and let Nigerians evaluate that choice on its own merits. If there is a genuine coalition conversation happening between his camp, the NDC, and the wider G100 process, it should be communicated through proper channels. Official statements, joint appearances, not left for Nigerians to piece together from social media posts and songs mistaken for policy announcements. Transparency serves everyone here, including the politicians themselves, because uncertainty breeds exactly the kind of misinformation we discussed earlier in this report. Here is what I am watching for and what you should watch for too. Will Atiku or the ADC issue any direct official response to the NDC's public appeal? Will the rescheduled August 31 summit in Abuja actually produce a concrete framework, or will it be postponed again? Will the G100's doctrine of necessary democratic opposition survive contact with the same personal ambitions that sank the 2025 coalition attempt? And as we move closer to the January 16, 2027 poll, will either Atiku or Obi actually step aside for the other? Or will both remain in the race and let Nigerians decide directly who carries the opposition banner? If this story mattered to you, do well to like it,
Share it with someone who has been asking what is really going on with Atiku, Obi, and this coalition talk, and leave your own view in the comments. I do read them. Subscribe so you are here for the next update, because this story is far from over, and the next major test comes at the end of this month. This has been NAIJA News Online. Stay informed, stay sharp, and I will see you in the next one.